how what's happening in Pakistan affects your life. If you think the impending economic and financial crisis in Pakistan isn't going to affect you, think again. Right now, Pakistan has its faith in the International Monetary Fund for a bailout from its severe economic problems, despite increasing debts and skyrocketing inflation. But why is Pakistan in such a bad situation? Should the rest of the world be concerned? And can they manage to steer clear before reaching a point of no return? Look, the economy of Pakistan has traditionally been fragile. Today, though, it's different since they're in danger of collapsing. To put it simply, Pakistan has faced economic challenges and fiscal difficulties in recent years, including high inflation, declining foreign exchange reserves, a large trade deficit, and a growing fiscal deficit. Speaking of, the World Bank estimates that Pakistan's total external debt has risen from $115.669 billion at the end of 2020 to $130.433 billion by the end of 2021. Then, in September 2022, the nation's external debt stood at a whopping $126.9 billion. What's more, Pakistan's debt-to-GDP ratio is currently at a risky level of 70%. And this year, 40 to 50% of government revenue would be used to pay interest. Also, interesting to note that around $23 billion of Pakistan's $27 billion in bilateral debt is made up of loans from friendly neighbor China. As a result of the government's cash-strapped decision to restrict imports, thousands of containers of food, raw materials, and equipment are sitting in ports, pushing up inflation to a 48-year high. Experts predict only a few more weeks of imports that the government can afford. It doesn't help that Pakistani rupee had its largest one-day decline in more than 20 years on January 26, 2023. Then, Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves fell to $4.3 billion in January of current year, their lowest level since 2014. It's true, the country is often enmeshed in issues, but a slew of recent international crises, like the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, have exposed and worsened the nation's political, economic, and security cracks. With worries that it would not be able to pay back part of its foreign debt, there are rising concerns that Pakistan is edging closer to default. The worry is that Pakistan won't be able to import the essential goods it needs to maintain its economy and feed its population in the near future. Now, if you're only just hearing about the country's issues, let us break it down for you. Pakistan faces a range of complex and interrelated economic, political, and social challenges. For instance, poverty. Despite some progress in reducing poverty in recent years, it remains a significant challenge in Pakistan, with a large portion of the population living below the poverty line. Then comes corruption, a major problem in Pakistan, which has a negative impact on the economy, investment, and the delivery of public services. Not to forget the energy shortages, with a recent nationwide outage as proof. Then, of course, is the security issue. Pakistan has faced security challenges, including terrorism and sectarian violence, which have had a negative impact on the country's economic and social development. In comparison to its neighbors, Pakistan has a weak infrastructure, including a lack of basic services such as clean water, sanitation, and healthcare, which affects the country's economic development and the quality of life for its citizens. And the cherry on top is this: political instability. This, combined with a lack of governance, have had a huge negative impact on the country's development and its ability to address its challenges. Now the question comes up: how close is Pakistan to defaulting? And how does it affect your life? But before answering those questions, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. Look, if Pakistan were to default on its debt obligations, it could have significant consequences for the country and all over the world. We've seen it once with Sri Lanka. So, if the IMF loan doesn't come through, we can expect pretty much the same scenario, if not worse. In Pakistan, a default would likely lead to a reduction in the country's creditworthiness, making it more difficult and expensive for the government and private sector to borrow money in the future. This means a decrease in investment and economic growth, which could further derail the country's standard of living and employment. On the global scale, a default by Pakistan could lead to a reduction in confidence in emerging market economies, causing investors to pull their capital out of these economies and potentially leading to a decline in the value of local currencies. This, in turn, could lead to a decline in global economic growth and potentially trigger a financial crisis in other countries. It's important to note that the impact of a default would depend on the specifics of the situation and the actions taken by the government and other stakeholders to mitigate its effects. Still, a default would likely have significant consequences for the country and the world, and it's generally in the interest of both the borrower and the lender to prevent such an outcome. Also, if Pakistan's economy were to experience a significant and prolonged downturn, it could have spillover effects on the broader regional and global economy. For example, a severe economic crisis in Pakistan could lead to a rise in unemployment, social and political instability, and a reduction in consumer and investor confidence, which brings in a decrease in demand for goods and services and an overall decrease in economic activity. A crisis of this sort in Pakistan would lead to a reduction in foreign investment, which affects the economies of all the countries that are economically tied to Pakistan. There's hope of some help from donors like China, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, but there will always be some conditions that come with it. Like China has its eyes set on the energy corridor connecting the Arabian Sea to China's western provinces and the strategically significant port of Gwadar. Then, on geopolitical concerns ranging from the Taiwan Strait to Afghanistan and Ukraine, China will also look to Pakistan for assistance. So it's a give-and-take situation. But as the country's current prime minister once said,
और जो कहते हैं ना कि beggars can't be choosers.
Beggars can't be choosers. With help from the IMF and loans from friendly states, particularly Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, Pakistan may be able to temporarily escape default. These, however, won't address the economy's obvious underlying problems or the fact that, in order to prevent a future default, a fundamental shift in the economy's production and consumption patterns is required. That said, one of Pakistan's political parties appear to have the ability or political inclination to effect such a transformation. According to reports, Pakistan must repay $73 billion by 2025. Without debt restructuring, it won't be able to do so. If you remember, a summer of catastrophic flooding in Pakistan was brought on by a monsoon on steroids that's directly related to climate change. More than 1,700 people were killed, homes, infrastructures, and most farmlands were damaged, and millions of people were left homeless. It submerged entire communities and caused a third of the country to be underwater. Right now, nearly 90,000 people are still living outside of their homes months after the worst of the storm, and the floodwater is still visible in some places. Any country would find it extremely difficult to recover from such a catastrophe and reconstruct damaged infrastructure, such as roads and schools, let alone one whose government is already facing financial difficulties like Pakistan's. Not to forget that last year there was a great deal of political controversy surrounding the choice of the army chief and the military's role in Pakistani politics. In fact, former PM Imran Khan's disagreement with the military over the choice of senior army personnel played a significant role in his removal from the office. All eyes are currently focused on their new army general's handling of civil-military ties. Under the previous one, the military firmly established its hold of all facets of covertly implemented policies. Few people in Pakistan now trust the army when they say they'll no longer be involved in politics. In the middle of all of this, the Pakistani Taliban, a terrorist organization that killed tens of thousands of Pakistanis between 2007 and 2014, have been encouraged by a Taliban-ruled Afghanistan and are once more a threat to Pakistan. You see, Pakistan seems to have run out of luck and is surrounded by all sorts of major issues at the moment. It was already in a state of disarray due to the fall of the regime in Afghanistan across the border and the onset of an economic catastrophe, and the blows began to come swiftly, one after the other. Analysts worry that Pakistan would wind up like its neighboring country Sri Lanka on the economic front. But there's hope that a deal with the IMF will save the worst from happening and hopefully put the country in a good direction. What's your forecast for Pakistan in the coming months? Let us know in the comments down below, and make sure to watch the next video.